can you imagine this? Let's say you're thrown out of your apartment, and let's say you have a job, but you haven't saved any money. You've got to come up with 2 months' rent and a month's security. So your apartment is $1,000. You got to come up with $3,000. You're making a minimum wage. How are you going to save $3,000, right? How are you going to get that $3,000? That could take you years to save the money, right? Ithaca is a community that prides itself on being the most enlightened community in the United States. We do everything right. We're most politically correct people on earth. And that part of that is denial. And part of the denial is it's really hard to make a living in Ithaca. And the apartments and houses are too high for the income that people make. Part of that is because of Cornell's wages in Ithaca College, and the students. But also, I think part of it is the town, and I've been here many, many years, simply refuses, except for the Working Center and people like that, to acknowledge that you can't live on minimum wage. Even in Ithaca, you can't do it. You can't. And so that's the thing that bothers me. I don't think we have a real conversation about that.
$23,000 is going to pay for a single person to have a reasonable lifestyle if they live with other people. But if you live alone, it's not a lot of money. And when you look at it, the $23,000 figure is what it costs for a person to be able to just basically live.
If someone wants a job in Ithaca, they can get a job. They can get 3 jobs if they want a job. Now, can they make enough money from any one of them to really sustain themselves? Probably not. Most of them are minimum wage jobs, and the cost of living here is high. It's very high for someone making minimum wage.
Ithaca is one of the most exploitative places I could ever imagine. When I first moved up here, I would go and apply for jobs, and they'd say, "I'll give you so much," and I'd laugh. I'd actually just laugh, and I'd say, "Well, I was making it 10 years ago. What are you talking about?" I couldn't believe it.
Recently, we helped some people who worked at a cafe in College Town. They didn't have transportation, and they were being kept or living in an apartment out by the airport. So they didn't have any freedom of movement, basically. They were working 12-hour days, seven days a week, getting paid not very much at first, and then not getting paid anything after a while.
I think that there are a lot of places that don't pay workers an equitable wage or a living wage. I think that the big employers that are living wage employers are doing a really good job at it. But at the same time, the economy's also gone down. No fault to the employers, but it's made it more difficult for them when the living wage goes up to be able to go up also.
Well, if you have, let's say, a high school education, right, or even a college education, and you don't have anybody to support you, right? You don't have a trust fund, you don't have a business, so you have to work for a living. Well, how do you work for a living? You work for a living in Ithaca, New York, and you make a certain hourly wage. Well, what are you going to do with that? You have to keep working 8, 10, 12 hours a day. So what else are you supposed to do? Invest in the stock market? You don't have any money to invest in the stock market. Win the lottery? Well, if you go down to the grocery store, it used to be in my neighborhood, you'd see lines of people, and that's what they're buying. They're buying lottery tickets. This whole attitude that any kind of work is better than none, I don't believe that.
A lot of people that work in Ithaca can't afford to live here. Rents are incredibly high. And the reason for that is because of all of the students. No offense to students, but what are the rest of us supposed to do? We just need more space. And the colleges, I think that Cornell should double the amount of dorm space that it has. I see the same kind of thing. I see it's grown a lot. They've also increased somewhat their housing, but not at the same level as they've increased the number of students that are there. We've
expanded greatly. I mean, I think probably the college is twice as big. Every year, not every year, but they panic. Oh my God, the students aren't coming. Oh, what are we going to do? We got 500 more showed up than they thought they were going to have, and then there wasn't any place to put them.
We had a really large class in 2007 come in, and we had the largest class ever in 2009. We had, at that point, what was looking like almost 600 students over our capacity to house them. It was a big surprise, let me just say, a really big surprise.
That's been true of this college ever since I've been here. Every single time the students showed up. They always showed up.
And it's evident that we have more students to accommodate than we're able. We will begin to offer a financial incentive for upper class students to encourage them to move off campus. The last couple of times that we've dealt with over-enrollment, even offering a financial incentive, we have not been able to get enough students to move off campus. We're looking at how can we add additional space to campus housing. So there are currently plans in the works to start a third phase construction at College Circle. The collaboration with the City of Ithaca really isn't about how many students we release to move off campus. I mean, we make those decisions based on keeping the residence halls full, and it really doesn't have anything to do with, gosh, they need more tenants in town or they need less tenants in town.
If you look at how much student housing costs, that drives the rents for everything else. This community could absorb 1,000 new housing units, just to, roughly, just to meet the existing need. I'm like, this is ridiculous. A couple months ago, there was a veteran who had returned from overseas. He's out of the service. He was homeless. He was sleeping outdoors. They got him an apartment out in Groton. So here's a guy who's looking for a job, and he can get a job in Ithaca, but he can't afford to live here. But the bus service to Groton makes it so that he won't be able to have that job.
It's a lot more expensive to find housing within the city limits than it is out in Groton and Freeville and Danby and Dryden, all the outlying areas. That is where the more affordable available housing is. Can the people actually function from that housing once they move into it? Most of the people we work with do not have vehicles. They are depending on the bus system, which, as you may know, is pretty sketchy. So it's really put people kind of in between a rock and a hard place, I would say. All of the services that may have been put in place for this individual, possibly mental health counseling, substance abuse, outpatient treatment, their job, are all at risk, because now they're not going to be able to get to these appointments on time, they're going to miss work, and it could just create this vicious cycle for people that they're right back where they started.
People live out here, there, and everywhere because it's cheap, and then they have these old junk cars. What happens when your car doesn't run? You don't get to work. What happens when you don't get to work? You lose your job. Poor people are held hostage by the lack of public transportation. They live out in trailers and they live out in the country and wherever they live. Then they try to get to work. Well, if the car breaks down, what are they going to do? They can't afford to fix it, right? So it's a vicious cycle. It really is a vicious cycle.
Most of the people we work with, believe it or not, are working. They're working minimum wage jobs at Burger King and McDonald's, and not only are they working one job, they're working 2 and 3 jobs, and they're probably closing these restaurants after midnight. You can't get home to Groton. You can't get home to Freeville or Enfield because there is no transportation that late at night. So it really puts a strain on the resources to try to get people housing within the city. It's just so expensive for people to try to live within the city. Most of the folks we work with can't afford it.
Not everybody can make it. Not everybody is making it. Not everybody's even capable of making it, because that's antithetical to our national dialogue that it's up to you. You know, if you're homeless, it's your fault. If you can't feed your children, it's your fault. If you don't have a job, it's your fault. I hope we're changing that a little bit now.
You know, we're in a growing stage, and one of the things I said before was that we see the interconnection between many of the different problems that go on. And so it would be great if we got to the point where we were either able to work on other issues ourselves, or or we create stronger relationships with those other grassroots community type organizations.
There's a new model, and it's to provide housing up front to people, and then once they're in the housing, provide them all the case management and support services once they're there.
There are changes that are happening, and a lot of it is generational, because younger people are more open in seeing the changes that need to happen, and they're not so into having everything for themselves. It shouldn't be that way in our society, and it doesn't have to be.